Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. Today we're going to talk about tablets, and we're going to specifically focus on this tablet here. This is the Chuwi HiPad Pro, and it does all the things you would expect a tablet to do. In fact, it even has a little Bluetooth keyboard here for productivity and things like that. But of course, being a retro gaming channel, we're going to focus primarily on gaming. And I've always been drawn to using tablets as gaming machines. You know, they're like a big phone or like a mini TV or something like that, and I just like the portability of them, but also not having to compromise on having a nice big screen. Now, this tablet is going for $300 on AliExpress right now, and it isn't listed on Amazon yet, but I do hope that it hits a discount when it does get on that website. Either way, we're going to keep $300 in mind as the price point. And on a separate note, that little keyboard case cost an additional $30. And so in this video, we'll put this little tablet through its paces, and we'll see whether or not setting up something like a front end is going to improve the navigation experience. And of course, we'll test out the performance and see whether or not $300 is an accurate price point for the amount of systems and the graphical fidelity that you can expect inside. We got a lot of ground to cover, and I'm going to try to knock it out in under 25 minutes. We'll see how we do. Either way, let's get started. Okay, first things first, let's check out the specs. Now this is running on a MediaTek 8789 chipset, also known as the Helio G95. It has 8 cores, 2 of them are A76 cores running at 2.05 GHz, and the other 6 are A55 running at 2 GHz. It comes with 8 GB of RAM and 128 gigs of internal storage, and also has a microSD slot in case you want to add additional storage to it as well. One of my favorite things about it is the display, 10.8 inches, 2560 by 1600 resolution, and a 16 by 10 aspect ratio, which is really versatile when it comes to both 4x3 and 16x9 gaming. In terms of connectivity, we have 2.4 and 5 GHz Wi-Fi. This also is LTE capable if you wanted to add a SIM card, and it has Bluetooth 5.0. It also has 4 stereo speakers and really nice sound. In terms of battery, it's 7,000 milliamp hours and gives you between 6 to 10 hours of playtime depending on what systems you're playing. So, quick unboxing here. Chuwi sent this out for me as a review unit, and they sent everything including the keyboard case as well as the stylus pen. I really appreciate the simple design on their boxes, not a lot to show off here. It shows a little bit of the specs here on the side. Now here is the stylus pen here. It comes with 2 different tips. It feels really lightweight, I think to the point of feeling a little bit cheap. I'm not a huge stylus guy, but we will test this out later. And here is that keyboard case. Now this is a Bluetooth case, which means you'll have to connect it wirelessly. It's not going to be like an Apple keyboard where you just plug it right in. But in many respects, it does actually feel like an Apple keyboard. These little chiclet keys that they have here are very reminiscent of something like the Magic Keyboard on an iPad. Overall, I actually think these are pretty good keys. They remind me of a laptop's keyboard. Not a lot else with the case other than the power button and then a USB-C charger for the case itself. Let's see what else we have inside. A charging plug and a USB cable. And this is just a standard plug here, just 5 volts and 2 amps. Now the tablet will actually charge via quick charging, but not through this plug. You'll have to use one of your own. So further inside the box, we get a warranty card, a product inspection card, and then just a quick user manual. Not a lot of information here. Let's get to the actual tablet itself. Now the device I have here is called Blue, but it has a bit of a gray-blue coloring to it. I actually like the two-tone coloring on the back. Now the device has 2 different protective layers. The one here with the text we're obviously going to take off, but the other one we're actually going to keep on. It works pretty well. Let's take a quick look at the outside. You can see it's squared off a lot like an iPad Pro, but has a nice smooth feel to it. These are the volume buttons as well as a mic input. And then we have a small camera on the back as well. Each side has dual stereo speakers, and on the bottom here you have a microSD SIM card slot. Let's open that up and take a look inside. And yep, it's got room for microSD and SIM card. Anyway, that's about it for the outside. It's got a professional look to it. It weighs in at 459 grams, and I think that's a great weight. It's not too light, like it doesn't feel cheap, but all the same, it doesn't feel uncomfortable to hold in one hand either. It's a nice feeling tablet. It's well balanced. It's actually the same weight of the Fire tablet that I had reviewed a few months back. I will say that just in overall terms of feel and design, this one is much better produced than the one from Amazon. I love the squared off edges to it, and it has these nice tiny bezels as well. It's just a nice looking tablet. So let's start it up and see what it's like. Now, as you can imagine, it's going to have that typical Android setup. One note here, the tablet has a camera bump, which means that when you push down on one corner, it's not going to sit flush. That's kind of annoying to me, but as soon as you put a case on it, you're not going to have that problem at all. In terms of overall feel and UI, it feels nice and zippy. It's a 60Hz display, but all the same, it feels really smooth. And in terms of operating system, this is running Android 11. And that's a good and bad thing. We'll talk about that more later. First, let's try out the stylus. Now, I didn't have to do anything in order to get this to work. I didn't have to pair it in Bluetooth or touch anything. It just immediately started working. Now, personally, I don't like using a stylus with a tablet. I think a finger works just fine. And I think the stylus costs an additional $30 or something like that. To be honest, I'm not a good judge when it comes to it, but I can verify that yes, it works just fine. That being said, if people really did like this, I wish it would have a top magnetic port to it, much like they have on an iPad. But unfortunately, there are no magnets on the top or the sides. Now, there is a magnet at the bottom, but that's actually for the Bluetooth keyboard case. So while that magnetic bottom does work, you're not going to be able to use that at the same time as the Bluetooth keyboard case. Speaking of which, let's try the case out. Now, the case has a magnetic back to it, so it connects very firmly to the tablet when you first put it together. And it feels pretty good. It doesn't add a lot of bulk to it, and I like the rough sort of wool material on the outside. Now, you can't make any adjustments to the angle, and you are going to have to connect it via Bluetooth, so you do have to do that setup first. But let's do a little bit of typing on it and get a feel for it. So a couple things come to mind. Number one, it doesn't feel too cramped to me. I'm used to using a 75% size keyboard, and in that regard, it feels just fine. Although if you have larger hands, you might have a problem. I also don't mind that it lays flat against the surface. I was expecting it to be a little bit uncomfortable because it's not at an angle. But when it came down to it, I had no issues. I felt this was a perfectly comfortable keyboard when it comes to using it in a travel use case. And when you have it propped up at the ankle, it's actually pretty secure, to the point where I would be comfortable using it on my lap. Now, it does use USB-C for charging, and I was hoping that the charge would actually carry on into the tablet itself, much like it does with an iPad using the Magic Keyboard. But unfortunately it doesn't. All this does is just charge the keyboard itself. So no pass-through on this one. And of course, same thing on the other end. If you want to charge into the tablet, it's not going to carry over to the keyboard. Now, oddly enough, the plug for the tablet is on the opposite end as the keyboard. So to me, that's a minor inconsistency, but all the same, I wish they had them both on the same side. But overall, I'm actually a big fan of this case. You know, it actually will do auto sleep and turn on anytime you open and close it. And it does add a lot of productivity to this tablet. So if you wanted to use this while traveling to answer emails and things like that, I think I could safely say that I could bring this without having to worry about a laptop. And so in that regard, it's doing the things that I hope a tablet would do. And so honestly, when I think of a tablet, I think of a couple different functions. Mostly media consumption, but I do think that productivity could work with this one as well. Of course, you're going to have to pay that extra $30 for the keyboard, and the stylus unfortunately does not connect to it magnetically. But all the same, I do think that you could use this for regular tablet things. So if anything, I would say if you're going to use this for anything more than gaming, then definitely get the keyboard case. And the stylus, I think you can probably skip. But yeah, that's a quick summary of the tablet functions on this. Let's do a quick check of the cameras. So here's a look at the back-facing camera, which has that embedded mic here on the back. And here's a look at the front-facing camera, along with that same embedded mic. So probably not so great for doing webcam or Skype calls. Okay, with all that out of the way, let's actually start getting into the gaming aspect. So I'm going to log in here to my Google Play Store account and then just go through some of the apps that I've previously downloaded on other devices, and then just start throwing them onto this machine. And to keep things simple, I'm just going to leave everything on the internal storage for now. And so here is the Android interface, just your typical Android 11 experience. I would say nothing really that remarkable about it. So the first thing I did is install the ATV launcher, which gives me these nice little tiles here, and allows me to hide any of the apps I don't want to see. I've also connected the 8BitDo SN30 Pro controller, which is one of my favorite to use for retro gaming and when traveling. And the connection on this was super solid. I never had any sort of connectivity or lag issues. In terms of apps, I'm going to use RetroArch for retro gaming and PS1. Then I have a PSP emulator, Nintendo 64, Sega Dreamcast, Sony PS1, and Nintendo DS. On the second row, I have Yabasan Shiro for Sega Saturn. And then I'm going to use the Dolphin MMJR app for GameCube. And then we're using Ether SX2 for PS2, Citra MMJ for 3DS. And then I have two front ends, both Dig and Reset Collection. We'll look at those in a second. Finally, I have my PlayStation, Xbox, and Stadia streaming apps, PC streaming with Moonlight, and then a couple Android games. And finally, just a couple utilities for easy access. So let's jump into front ends first. I've already set these up, and so I'm going to start with Dig first. And all I've really done here is let the system scrub itself, and then I installed this Electful theme, and that's basically all I've done at this point. It'll scrape all your own box art, it'll organize everything for you, it's very easy to set up. And it's nice because you can navigate everything using just the Bluetooth controller. So let's boot up a game here. We'll start with Shadowgate. And this is running with the RetroArch backend, and all I really had to do was just set up my hotkeys and everything else. And yeah, it works just fine. Now, one nice thing is that when I close out of this game, I have set it up for auto save states and auto loads, so when I jump right back into it, it goes right back to where I was. But yeah, in a nutshell, that's how Dig's going to work. Let me show you how Reset Collection works. This one costs $5, but it's a pretty nice app. This one will also organize all your systems. You do have to add them one by one, but it does give this nice box art, which it scrapes on its own. Now, same thing here, you can navigate completely with a controller. You rarely have to use the touchscreen at all. And so in that sense, both of these front ends work really well when it comes to using your tablet for gaming. Now earlier I mentioned I really like the 16:10 aspect ratio, and that's because it's really versatile when it comes to some of these retro systems. For example, here with Game Boy Advance, the 3:2 aspect ratio looks phenomenal on this display. And so in that sense, there's no real need to stretch or anything else like that. Most of these are going to work at their ideal aspect ratio. And so one note here, in case you want to use either Dig or the Reset collection, both of them are going to work the same with the same backend. So for example, I can jump right back into my same Shadowgate game here using a different front end. Alright, let's start some gameplay testing now. I'll mostly focus on some of the higher end systems, but I do want to confirm that arcade works just great on this. And as you can see, 4:3 content looks good on this display as well. I would consider the black bars on the sides to be fairly minimal. One thing to note is the black bar on the left side is going to be a little bit bigger to offset the camera hole punch on the top left. Moving over to Nintendo DS, no problems here. This is with high resolution 3D rendering. And I've adjusted the screen ratio to have the bottom screen on the far right here, and then most of the rest taken up by that main screen on the left. But plays great. Moving over to Nintendo 64, this one plays equally well too. In fact, this is upscaled to 1080p and I had zero hiccups altogether. So I think when it comes to Nintendo 64 gameplay, this thing's gonna have no problems at all. Now I'm totally sick of testing out GoldenEye 007, but Perfect Dark is a good equivalent, and as you can see here, it's running just fine at 1080p as well. So Nintendo 64 is a win on this. Moving over to Sega Saturn, this also played perfectly fine, even when upscaled to the native device resolution. And this is a 1600 display, so I'm not sure if it's going to upscale to that, but at the very least, I do know this is going to work with 1080p, no problem. So, if you like to play Sega Saturn, and you also enjoy upscaling the resolution on 3D polygons with this system, you're going to be just fine. But if you're a purist like me when it comes to Sega Saturn, you like those big chunky pixels, you can obviously play at the native Saturn resolution as well, and it looks just fine too. Okay, let me cut for a second just because I think this is funny. So I'm like behind the camera, you know, the tripod is like right here and everything else is right in front of me. I have my little controller here and I'm in my room with all my pots and pans or whatever. But the funny thing is, chicken always finds a way to get on my lap. Now we're going to use the standalone DuckStation emulator for PS1, and I found that the 4x resolution does best. Now 5x is 1080p, and so that would potentially give you the best display, but at 4x you really can't tell the difference. And with the 4x resolution, you can also turn on geometry correction, and that'll reduce a lot of the wobbling that happens with 3D pixels when you upscale. So yeah, I would say 4x resolution geometry correction is the best you're going to get out of this device, and it's really good. Okay, moving over to Sega Dreamcast, we're going to use the Redream emulator here, also upscaling it to 1080p, and zero problems across the board. And again, like I mentioned before, 4:3 content on this looks really nice at the 16:10 aspect ratio. In fact, I don't mind these black bars on the sides at all. And so when it comes to these 4:3 systems, PS1, Dreamcast, Nintendo 64, you're going to get a nice beautiful display and really good performance. And so here's another great thing about the 16:10 is that 16:9 content looks good too. Here's Sony PSP, 3x resolution, and there's a little bit of black bars on the top and bottom, but really minimal, and this looks very nice too. I would say the majority of your games are going to run at 3x resolution just fine, and some of those harder ones to play might have a few issues. For example, Chains of Olympus at 3x resolution is relatively good, but it will dip down to something like 55 frames per second as you're playing in some of those bigger scenes. But either way, that's still pretty great performance. I was getting a little bit of audio stuttering when I was playing Outrun 2006 at a 3x resolution, and so you have a bit of a decision to make. You can either just play it with a little bit of that stuttering, or you can turn down the resolution to 2x instead, which is going to eliminate the audio stuttering, but of course you're going to have a little bit worse graphics. But either way, across the board, I think PSP was pretty good on this. So now let's move over to the harder stuff. Let's try out GameCube. And I'm going to run everything with the Dolphin MMJR emulator, and with a native GameCube resolution, so no upscaling here. But other than that, I left it at the default settings, and performance is pretty dang good. I would say comfortably about 75% of GameCube games are going to play well. And so a lot of these lower demand games are going to be just fine. You might have some accuracy issues just based on the fact that MMJR does have a couple speed hacks embedded into it. But across the board, I would say this is a pretty capable tablet when it comes to GameCube emulation. And of course, some games are going to have issues. For example, Metroid Prime does have some stutters and stops here and there, so it's not a perfect gameplay experience, but I would still consider it to be completely playable. And Luigi's Mansion was another one that got a little bit of slowdown too. But it's really only those top tier games that I would consider to be unplayable, things like F-Zero GX or the Star Wars Rogue Squadron games. Now moving over to PS2, unfortunately this one does require a lot of work in the back end just to get working correctly. So for example, I would recommend going into the settings and then adjusting the EE cycle rate and cycle skip to basically adjust the underclocking to as much as you're comfortable with. And if it's still not working, I would recommend going into the settings and then also turning off the frame limiter. This will give you mixed results. For example, it might make the game run too fast. But in some of the more medium or harder to play games, things like God of War, it does kind of balance things out so that they are playable. Other games, like Simpsons Road Rage, only need a moderate underclocking to work at full speed, and same thing with Crash Bandicoot here. And so I would say maybe half the games in the catalog are going to be playable, the other ones you're going to have to max the underclock, and it might not actually be worth it to you. So of all the systems, I would say that PS2 is probably the upper limit. I wouldn't consider this to be a PS2 tablet, but it is possible to play some games on it. I would just expect to do a lot of tweaks under the hood. Now when it comes to Android gaming, no real problems here, they mostly seem to play just fine. But honestly, a lot of these games will play just as good on much cheaper systems. So really, if you're into Android games, this may only be worth it to you if you want to have that nice big screen. Because otherwise you could get performance on a $100 phone that would be just as good. But let's try one of the harder Android games and see how this goes. We're going to do Genshin Impact with medium graphics settings, and then we're also going to turn on the 60 frames per second. Now I don't have an FPS monitor running right now, but overall it seems to run fairly well. And I would expect that if you turned it on to low settings, you would get even smoother gameplay performance. But for me, I found this medium setting to be a pretty good sweet spot. You get some smooth gameplay and nice graphics. And I don't play this game much, but it does seem to be a nice little Breath of the Wild clone. Oh hey, Iron Chunk. That was my nickname in college. Anyway, moving on, I realized I forgot to test 3DS, so we're going to use the Citra MMJ emulator here, and we're going to keep it at native resolution, and overall the performance is not great. Even the easiest to play games, things like New Super Mario Bros. 2, they just don't play at full speed. And the MMJ version of this emulator does have a lot of speed hacks working in order to make it work a little bit faster, and sometimes that can create some graphical artifacts like you see here in Ocarina of Time. Overall, I'd say 3DS is probably more than this tablet can handle. Okay, let's try out game streaming. I'm going to use the PS Play emulator here, and I'm connecting it to my PS5. Now I have gone in here and upscaled the resolution to 1080p on my display, and also increased the bitrate quite a bit. And this is well beyond what you can find in the official PlayStation Remote Play app, but it works really well. For Xbox, I'm going to use their standard Remote Play app, and this works well too. Unfortunately, it isn't fully supported with this controller. The L2 and R2 don't seem to work. But if you switch over to an Xbox controller, it works just fine, it plays really nicely. And so if you have an Xbox or a PS5 and you want to do a little bit of gameplay in bed, then this tablet would work fine. I think if it had Wi-Fi 6, you'd get an even stronger signal, but the 5 GHz that I was getting in here gave me no problems whatsoever. And finally, just testing Google Stadia here, this one worked fine too. And so overall, you have quite a few choices when it comes to cloud streaming and remote play. Last thing to test here, we're going to do Moonlight streaming to my desktop. This is going to allow me to stream PC games directly onto the tablet. And so I've connected to my laptop here, and I'm also using Steam Big Picture. And yeah, just like with the other remote services, this works really well too. And so this will be a nice solution if you want to play your PC games in a different room or on a couch or something else like that. And of course, you're not just limited to PC games, you can also run emulators on your PC and then stream them here. So if you want to play things like Wii U or Switch games, if your PC can handle it, you can just stream onto the tablet instead. And it works really well via Moonlight. Okay, so that's about it when it comes to gameplay demos. Let's talk about what I like and what I don't like about this device. We'll start, as always, with what I like. Number one, I like the display. The 16:10 aspect ratio makes it really versatile for a number of different game systems, and the high resolution display means that you can turn on integer scaling and get really good graphics. The performance is good. You can play basically up to most GameCube games. It didn't blow my socks off, but all the same, this is going to give you thousands of games to play, and I'm more than happy to play the ones that are on this system. Overall, the tablet has a high quality build to it. It feels really well made, and I do like combining it with that Bluetooth keyboard to kind of make it an all-in-one system. The performance on this, thanks to the 8 gigs of RAM, is nice and zippy. It felt like a more expensive tablet in that regard. And finally, the battery life is pretty good. I was getting at least 6 hours of gameplay when I was testing through GameCube, and if you're going to play some lower end stuff or watch movies, you're going to get 10 hours no problem. Okay, so now let's talk about what I don't like about this device. Number one, the cameras on this are pretty terrible. Like, I'd be embarrassed to use this for any sort of Skype calls, and this is definitely not something you'd want to use to take pictures with. And to add insult to injury, the camera bump on the back makes it so that the tablet does not sit flush. And personally, I'd rather they just remove the cameras altogether and then not have that bump. But unfortunately, you don't really have that choice here, so you're really going to want to have to get a case for this device anyway. And I mentioned it a couple times earlier, but I'm not a fan of using Android 11 for gaming. And that's because your SD card storage options are kind of limited. You can basically only use your micro SD card for scope storage. And that's not the end of the world, that just basically means it's going to expand your internal storage, but you're not going to be able to remove this SD card and plug it into anything to access the file structure. And so that kind of turns into a pain when it comes to transferring files over, but you can obviously just do that over USB instead. It's just going to be a little bit slower. And I was hoping the device would have video out capability, because it'd be really nice to be able to hook this into your TV and have a portable GameCube right then and there. But unfortunately, that's just not in the cards with this. And finally, the price to performance, even at $300, I'm not really sure it's there. In this day and age, you can find a used tablet for much cheaper than that, and that $300 price point is getting very close to the lowest spec iPad. Now granted, an iPad's not going to be great for gaming because of all the workarounds you need to do, but all the same, when it comes to performance, the Bionic A13 chip, which is in the low spec iPad, is quite a bit more powerful than the one we find in this tablet. But I think at $300 altogether, there's a good amount of value here. Sure, you could get a used tablet for cheaper, and of course when they're on sale, the Amazon tablets are about half the price of this one. But unlike the Amazon tablets, this one can play GameCube comfortably, and I think the overall form factor on this is quite good. And so if you're looking for a tablet to feel good, to feel like you paid a high-end premium price, the build quality on this is definitely there. Of course, there are some compromises, especially when it comes to the camera, and the performance is just almost there. Like, I really wish it could do PS2, but all the same, when it comes to a versatile tablet, something that you could do productivity things on, stream movies, do all that other kind of stuff, and then also have games on it, this is a pretty good choice. In fact, my plan with this device, as soon as I'm done with this review, is to turn it into a productivity tablet. So I'm going to put on Google Documents and things like that, and then I'm going to hand it to my wife to be able to use for checking email and browsing the web and watching movies and things like that. But secretly, I'm also going to keep all these emulators and games on here too. So that way, if I ever want to just grab it and connect my Bluetooth controller, I can just start playing games right then and there. And that's probably one of my favorite things about this tablet, is it does many things pretty dang well. Either way, let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm no tablet expert, but I've been using iPads since the beginning, and this one genuinely got me pretty excited. Either way, thanks for watching. Be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.